10 years old, I loved playing video games on my PlayStation 1 and talking about them with friends at school. One day someone asked me, "Nick, do you have Resident Evil? You should check it." English wasn't my native language, so at that age the title Resident Evil meant absolutely nothing to me. I had no idea what kind of a game it was supposed to be. Back then, in those simple times, we discovered games through pure word of mouth and fully trusted our friends' opinions. If someone said a game was awesome, that was all we needed to hear. So I went home and asked my dad to buy me something called residentevil. Now, my dad, bless him, either had no clue about age ratings or just didn't care. He let me watch and play absolutely anything I wanted, and without a second thought he bought me a game with that cover. It was the late 90s or early 2000s, and piracy was rampant where I lived. Finding a store that sold licensed games was next to impossible. Thinking back, I can only remember one kid who had a legitimate copy of Final Fantasy VII that was brought from abroad. Everything else we played was pirated. The Resident Evil copy my dad got me was no exception. It was a 2-disc anthology with Resident Evil 1, 2, 3 and Survivor. To cram that many games onto just 2 discs, the pirates had to make sacrifices. They cut out most of the cutscenes and voice acting, so usually we had no idea what was going on in the story, but it was still super fun. Sometimes my friends and I would just make up our own plot and voice the characters ourselves, improvising as we went.
Wesker!
Howdy there, military mama. Ever seen guns like these before?
In my version, the opening FMV was missing. The game just started with the characters entering the mansion. I had no idea what they were saying because all the voices were removed, but there was one cutscene the pirates had left in. So to say I was scared will be a massive understatement. I was terrified. After seeing the first zombie, I shut off the console and didn't touch the game for a couple of days. But eventually I came back. Not for long in the beginning, I played in very short sessions, sometimes without saving, replaying the same segments over and over. And it wasn't that I was getting braver, because I wasn't. Everything in that game scared me. The enemies, the mansion itself, the incredibly creepy music, and even the mute characters who waved their arms around but didn't say anything. And yet the gameplay was so captivating that before long I couldn't think about anything else. When summer break started, the first thing I did every morning after brushing my teeth and having breakfast was sit down and play Resident Evil, until I was called for lunch or dragged outside by friends to play. Honestly, I don't remember how long it took me to beat it. I feel like I spent the whole summer on it, but eventually I finished it, first as Jill, then as Chris. And after that I never came back to the first game, aside from the remake, which we'll talk about in another video. The announcement of Resident Evil 9 suddenly awakened in me the desire to replay the whole series in chronological order and record my fresh impressions, how well these games have held up over time. And even though I've grown up and, let's be honest, played plenty of games much scarier than the original Resident Evil, I still feel the same mix of curiosity and fear every time I launch it. And before we continue, just a quick note that all the footage shown here is recorded from the GOG version of the game. Before going back to the beginning, I decided to do a bit of research. I found out that the game's director Shinji Mikami was inspired by the titles like Alone in the Dark as well as Sweet Home, an earlier game directed by Takuro Fujiwara, who also served as producer on Resident Evil. In fact, Resident Evil was originally conceived as a spiritual successor to Sweet Home, with a supernatural setting where the characters would face off against otherworldly beings from Japanese folklore. The game was even supposed to be played from a first-person perspective, both to save system resources by minimizing the number of 3D objects and to mirror the visual style of Sweet Home, which used a first-person view during combat. However, after playing Alone in the Dark, Mikami was impressed by its cinematic fixed camera system, and the development team decided to adopt a similar style. On top of that, Capcom had lost the rights to the Sweet Home, so the story and setting had to be reworked from paranormal horror into more grounded science-biological horror approach. Still, many gameplay elements from Sweet Home made their way into Resident Evil. Once again, the action takes place inside the mansion, the characters can't escape. There's a limited inventory, a strong focus on exploration and puzzle solving, and clues scattered throughout the environment in the form of notes and documents. Even the iconic door opening animation, so familiar to Resident Evil fans, originated in Sweet Home. The events take place in July 1998. While some people were enjoying Alice in Chains' freshly released Unplugged album, others were being eaten alive in the forest near Raccoon City. To investigate a string of these gruesome murders, the Bravo team of the Special Police Unit STARS was sent in. Unfortunately, the Bravo team vanished, and the Alpha team was dispatched to find out what happened. In true 90s horror fashion, the game opens with a live-action intro where part of the Alpha team is immediately torn apart by grotesque mutated dogs. The remaining members flee for their lives and take shelter in a spooky mansion. Not ideal, but beggars can't be choosers. Once inside, as expected, the group splits up and you're left alone in a mansion full of secrets and horrifying monsters. I honestly have no idea how that intro would have affected me as a kid, but playing the game as an adult, I couldn't stop laughing. Don't get me wrong, it's fantastic and sets the perfect B-movie tone, but the overall vibe is quite different from how I remembered it in childhood.
Rebecca Chambers, Albert Wesker, Resident Evil.
This brings us to the dialogue and voice acting, which are at times absolutely hilarious. Let's start with now legendary line, "You were almost a Jill sandwich," the greatest line in the entire series. Nothing before or since has topped it.
Oh, Barry!
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right.
There are also some honorable mentions, like Richard, who's been bitten by a giant snake. Imagine you're a voice actor, and you're told to portray a man dying from a huge venomous bite that is spreading rapidly through his entire body. You're supposed to be in pain, on the verge of death, and action!
Richard, what happened?
Oh, Jill, this house is dangerous. There are terrible demons. Ouch!
Jeez.
Honestly, I think I sound more expressive when I stub my toe. Or how about the Shakespearean death of Enrico?
Everything was plotted from the start by Umbrella.
Enrico! Who killed him, I wonder?
I genuinely had a great time with all of this. It's one of those situations where something is so bad, it becomes good, and I love it. At the very start of the game, you choose between playing as Chris Redfield or Jill Valentine. Unlike Alone in the Dark, this choice doesn't just affect the character's appearance, it also influences the gameplay and story in meaningful ways. Key items are located in different places depending on the character, which changes the routes you take through the game. Chris and Jill also interact with different supporting characters. Jill is assisted by one of the series' most underrated characters, Barry Burton, while Chris is supported by Rebecca Chambers from the Missing Bravo team. Interestingly, each character has two possible endings, a good one and a bad one, depending on whether their supporting character survives. And if you fail to save them, which is pretty likely since the requirements are far from obvious, you won't even get a final boss fight. To me, that felt like the only truly unpredictable moment in the game. Something you can't foresee unless you already know what to do in certain key scenes. Other than that, the game is completely fair. There are no cheap deaths like in Alone in the Dark, no sudden traps you couldn't possibly know about on a first playthrough. Every puzzle has clues, and even the most surprising enemy encounters are telegraphed in a way that gives you a chance to react, either to fight or run. When you play as Jill, you get 8 inventory slots, along with a knife, handgun and the healing spray. As Chris you only get 6 slots, plus a knife and spray. While not having a gun at the start can be a bit off-putting for newcomers, the real challenge with Chris is managing his limited inventory space. The thing is, Resident Evil isn't what it appears to be at first glance. Despite having facade as survival horror, the game is fundamentally a clever puzzle. The mansion is essentially a giant Rubik's Cube of locked doors, enemies, hidden mechanisms and absurd logic. A blast to play through, but completely insane from a real-world perspective. Imagine working in a science lab where, in order to enter a certain room, you'd first have to find a key hidden behind an antique grandfather clock. But you can only move the clock after placing a special golden emblem into a niche above fireplace. An emblem you get from a trapped room, but only if you swap it with a wooden replica. And to get into that room in the first place, you need to play Moonlight Sonata on piano. Honestly, I'd love to see the job requirements for an Umbrella employee.
That doesn't make sense.
So to solve this mansion-sized brain teaser, you'll need to explore it thoroughly and prepare for a lot of backtracking. You never really know where or when an item might come in handy, and if you want to move around somewhat safely, you'll need to carry at least something to defend yourself. For example, you'll need a weapon and ammo, that's already 2 inventory slots. Let's say you also bring a healing item and a key. Now you're using 4 slots total, which is 2/3 of Chris' inventory and half of Jill's. The good news is that the first game already features an item storage chests, located in the famous save rooms, cozy little save zones where you can save your game and relax to some soothing music. Anything you store in one chest becomes available from others later, which makes inventory management a bit more forgiving. Overall, the game has excellent pacing. As you explore the mansion, you gradually unlock new areas, face stronger enemies, and acquire more powerful weapons to deal with them. And I have to give a special mention to one of the best shotguns in video game history. Blasting zombie heads off with a loud, crunchy crack is so satisfying, it deserves a moment of appreciation.
Nice.
The original Resident Evil still holds up as a solid horror game with engaging suspenseful gameplay, even after all these years. If you're not put off by the tank controls, I see no reason not to give it a shot, especially if you're curious about how the Resident Evil series began. You'll get used to the controls fairly quickly, they're actually more intuitive than they first seem. Both the action and puzzle elements have aged surprisingly well and remain quite enjoyable today. The music and ambient sounds create a dark, oppressive atmosphere that fits the setting perfectly, occasionally lightened by some hilariously bad voice acting, which honestly helps take the edge off in a good way. However, if you're a newcomer to the series, not really into retro gaming and just want to experience the best possible version of the first game, then I'd recommend the HD remaster of the remake instead. It offers the expanded classic foundation, but with modern visuals, improved controls, perfect for the first-time players. So whatever version you choose, I really hope you give the first Resident Evil a chance. Believe me, it's absolutely worth it. This has been Radio Nick, don't forget to like, subscribe and leave a comment. I'll see you in the next video.
You were almost a Jill sandwich.